All right, so thanks for joining me for the deep dive today. The topic that I have chosen to cover is one that we haven't done a lot of, and that is cancellations. All right, it's come up several times in the newsletters from the Salt Lake board. Their attorney, or the UAR. I actually think it's the Salt Lake board that puts those out, but he puts out a newsletter and he puts in some legal tips. I think it's every week that he comes out with it. Several of them recently have been regarding cancellations. So I want to talk about cancellations. Now we're going to be going over, if you see this list of forms here that I've added, cancellation of the exclusive right to sell, the buyer-broker agreement, buyer's notice of cancellation of the purchase contract, the seller's notice of cancellation, a contingent cancellation, which is a really pretty cool form. And then we've got all of these other supporting forms that these cancellations reference. So that's what we're going to be going over today. So the first thing that I want to talk about is canceling your agency agreement. Whether you've got a right to sell or the exclusive buyer-broker agreement. I see online on make sure that, okay, just want to make sure I'm getting the recording right. Okay, so I see online quite often in these Facebook groups for realtors, agents talking about firing their clients. Now, most of them, again, don't have any experience with how this can backfire on them. But as I've mentioned before, one of the pros or cons of having, 2,400 agents technically that I'm responsible for in Utah is that I get to see lots of yucky stuff that most people don't see, so whatever 2,400 times experience I get with ugly things each month compared to your 1 month of your own operations. So one of the ones that we saw was an interesting one where the agent wanted to fire their client, right? And that happens. You get bad blood. You're just not working well together. Maybe the client is asking you to do things you're not comfortable with, things like that. And so, or the client is just, they're super needy and they're wanting you to work so hard, like every single day you're going out doing showings and they're not really serious or whatever it is. I mean, there's lots of different reasons agents have wanted to fire their clients. Here's the problem is you have a contract with them. Just like they can't flippantly decide, you know what, I'm not going to work with you anymore, even though some agents do put that out there. They're like, yeah, if you don't like me, you can just fire me, which I think is not wise. I was going to say something harsher than that, but it's not wise. Okay. We have contracts to protect us. So we don't sign a contract and verbally say, yeah, if you want out, I'll let you out. Because then you call me and we are, I've seen agents where they're working with a builder and they've been working for 9 months with their client, helping them out. And then the client, the builder comes to them and says, hey, we can do this addition, we can add this back deck on, but we don't have the money to pay for it unless you guys bring in extra money or you don't pay your realtor fees. And I've seen this as a real life scenario. And the client's like, okay, we'll tell our realtor that we're not paying them anymore. And then we can get this upgrade for free. So when you've told your client, yeah, if you're not happy with me for any reason, that's dumb. Okay. I mean, there are some reasons they might not be happy with you, and that should engender a discussion that you're having with them, but never make a blanket statement. If you're not happy with me for any reason, I'll bow out gracefully, because that is seriously undervaluing and shortchanging yourself. Okay. What I'll tell clients is, look, if there's any reason I can't take care of you, then let me know and I'll do my very best to fix the problem, or I'll make sure that we get you assigned to an agent that can. For example, if something happened to one of my children and I needed to dedicate myself to them, then obviously I would want to make sure that you're taken care of, but my kid would come first. That's something that they can relate to. That's something that they can understand. And I'm not going to keep them bound to me if I can't take care of them properly. But I'm going to make sure that they get in touch with another agent and I can get a referral fee for that. Okay, so that's an example that I might use if somebody's worried about being bound in a contract. I'll say, you know what? I will do everything I can to take care of you. If you're not satisfied for any reason, talk to me. Because most of the times it's just like a relationship. Communication is paramount. If you're not communicating your needs to me, then it's tough for me to meet them. But if you do communicate your needs and for any reason I can't meet them, then I'll make sure that we get you in with somebody that can. All right. But I never want to say carte blanche. Yeah, if you ever don't like me, you're out. Easy peasy, because that defeats everything that we're about. Okay. So with that diatribe, I guess, let's talk about how to cancel the exclusive right to sell. First of all, we're referencing the company and the client here and the date that we entered that listing agreement on. So we're going to have that as a reference. And then this is the key language here. Both parties agree to mutual release each other from any and all obligations, claims, liability, and demands arising out of the agreement, including but not limited to the agreement's protection period unless checked below. Now let's talk about that protection period. All right. And I actually didn't add that form. So I'm going to jump over here, look at a new form. So this is the exclusive right to sell. Let's see here. Let's look at the protection period. If within, let's say, 3 months after the termination or expiration of this listing, the property is acquired by any party to whom the property was offered or shown by the company during the listing period or any extension of the listing period, the seller still agrees to pay to the company the brokerage fee stated up in section 2, unless the seller is obligated to pay a brokerage fee to another brokerage based on another valid listing agreement entered into after the termination of this one. So what this means, if we jump back here to this cancellation, is let's say that I have a seller that comes to me and says, you know what, I've changed my mind. I'm not going to sell the home. All right. And, you know, our job transfer fell through. We haven't been able to find another house that we like, whatever the reason. Again, multitude of reasons why they could come to this conclusion. I can say, okay, I totally understand. We can cancel this agreement. We're going to mutually release each other from all claims and everything, but the protection period is not canceled or terminated. So this means now I could just take it off the market. I could say, okay, we'll take it off market, which isn't a cancellation of the agreement. It's just a change of status to off market status. And sometimes I get this feeling that, you know what, I'm not sure these guys are being honest with me. You know, I think maybe they've got somebody on the side that they're wanting to list with or something like that. Or I just showed a home to somebody that seemed very interested in buying it, and these guys are neighbors or friends, and I think they're talking behind my back and trying to cut me out of the deal. In this case, I could choose that the protection period is not canceled or terminated because over here, the property is being acquired by somebody that was shown the property during the listing period. Okay. And so they would still, since I showed them the property during the listing period, they would still owe the commission. So I could check this box here and say, okay, we'll cancel this agreement. But if I think that there's anything fishy going on, I can protect myself a little bit with this. And if they move forward with their neighbor and sell the home, then I can go back and say, you know what? They saw this home during the listing period. We still have a valid contract, and these contracts are enforceable, and I can sue for a commission. All right. Now, I can cancel this, and maybe I cancel this, but I've put in several $100s in marketing. You know, I ordered a property tour. I've done a bunch of flyers, whatever it is, you know, but I've put in some money, and I at least want to make myself whole. Now, maybe I want to make myself more than whole. That's okay. I don't have to justify my actual expenses because I've got time factored in as well. So I can come in here and I could pick any number. I could say $1,000. Okay. This will compensate me somewhat for my time, not fully, obviously, but somewhat for my time. And it compensates me for the fees that I've already incurred with this. So if I'm canceling this agreement, number one, it has to be a mutual cancellation. You can't decide unilaterally to fire your clients. If you do so, they have grounds to sue you because you have a contract that says you'll be serving them, right? You can't break that contract unilaterally. Unilaterally means one-sided, meaning that you made that decision on your own. This has to be a joint decision that you guys make together. And then if you are canceling, you need to understand that you don't have to just take a loss. Okay. So if you've put in some hard costs associated with it, you can reimburse those. You can get reimbursed a little bit more than hard costs. It's totally up to you and what you negotiate in your cancellation. Any questions on this form? Okay, I'm going to move on to the next one. Cancellation of the exclusive buyer broker agreement. Same thing, lots of reasons why a buyer might decide to cancel. And again, we've got the same mutual release. There's a protection period as well. So same type of stuff. So almost the exact same form. It's just now we're canceling our buyer broker agreement. So these things need to be done. You cannot fire a client. They cannot simply fire you. If you're deciding to part ways, it's a decision that you're making together. And it is notable, I suppose, that the broker, okay, now it could be the authorized buyer's agent or broker. Now, is the buyer's agent authorized to sign some of these? I get all the time forms sent to me by my agents who are well-trained, thank you very much, where it's a limited agency consent form with another equity agent, and they are not as well-trained as my agents are, and they've went and signed as the authorized representative to sign a limited agency consent form. They are not authorized. All right. And thankfully, my agent catches it and sends it to me, and I'm signing on the line next to the other agent. So you need to understand, am I authorized or am I not to sign something like this? Okay. And this is one where you may want to call me. And a lot of agents will call me up and say, hey, so-and-so wants to fire me. I'm really upset about it. I think I've worked really hard. I don't think I've done anything wrong. And I can say, you know what? I'm not going to sign this unless, like I'll have your back, unless we get a minimum of $1,000 or whatever. But I'll have a conversation with you, and then you can go back to your clients and say, you know what, my broker will not sign off on this cancellation unless we have this. All right. Does that make sense? I need to stop sharing so I can see everybody. You guys need to understand I have your back. Now, what are the situations when I won't have your back? Anybody? Come on.
We didn't follow the right procedures, and we didn't watch the trainings and know what we were doing.
Yeah, exactly. If you guys broke the rules, okay, if you didn't use the correct forms, I have nothing I can enforce. For example, that closing cost addendum. You call me up because your client's pissed off at you. I can't support you in that. You did the wrong thing. You didn't use the correct form. Okay. So if you do something wrong, I can't support you in being wrong. We have to do the right thing. But if we've done the right thing and you've worked hard for your clients, absolutely, I'll have your back. Okay. And we don't need to roll over and get kicked. And it's very simple. And I can have a conversation with the client and say, yeah, I understand. I understand you're frustrated, but Kylie did a great job. She did everything that she was required by law. And I understand you guys have a, personality conflict here and all of that, but everything that's required by law, she did. And so I'm not just going to make her walk away and take nothing from this. You need to make her whole, or we enforce the contract, and you have a choice. You can wait 6 months until it ends. And yeah, I've played hardball like that sometimes. Wait out till the end of the contract. Otherwise, you owe us a commission. Or we can refer you to another agent. If you're, conflicting with Kylie, you can work with Jake. And, then it's all going into the same bank account, right? So whatever, we'll try something to help support you. But you need to understand, I'll have your back as long as I can have your back. If we're not using the correct forms, then you've tied my hands. All right, let's move on to something a little bit more challenging. We've got a buyer that wants to cancel the real estate purchase contract. Now, this is the scenarios that have come up in the legal issues raised by the Salt Lake Board attorney, and where buyers and sellers are trying to cancel. Most of the time, it's a buyer trying to cancel. Every once in a while, we will find a seller. So let's say that we've got a buyer trying to cancel their contract. We've got several different options here. And for this, you need to know your forms, which is why I've got all of these extra forms here in our drop down. Okay. So notice of cancellation of the REPC prior to the due diligence deadline. Now we know what that means. So I can jump down to it. If anybody doesn't know what it means, let me know and I can jump down to that due diligence deadline. But here we are giving notice between buyer and seller. Prior to the due diligence deadline, the earnest money gets released in accordance with section 8.1B of the REPC, which basically just says, hey, we've canceled prior to this due diligence deadline. Notice, please, here that there is no room for explanation. Okay. Am I being clear what I'm saying? I'm going to actually look in your eyes so you know why I'm saying this. There is no room for explanation. So as an aspect of your fiduciary duty, what part of this might I be referring to? You know, there's different parts of fiduciary duty that come into play here. What might I be, what part of your fiduciary duty could you potentially violate here?
Their privacy?
Yeah, the confidentiality, right? Okay. So here's a scenario. And by the way, all of my scenarios are real scenarios. They're things that I have faced. Okay. Let's say that I've got a buyer and these guys, and this is recorded and anybody can be watching this, but it's true. These guys are a pain in the ass, right? Like they go to their mom and dad for everything. They second guess everything that I tell them. They're not taking my advice. They're just, I mean, these guys are a nightmare to deal with. And we can resolve all of their issues, but man, they just keep coming up with issues. Mom and dad are trying to talk them into moving into their basement with them, you know, save up till they've got 50% down, whatever bullcrap reason they're coming up with. It is a bullcrap reason. I know it, you know it. And you know what? I've worked with this other agent. Let's say the other agent is Carson. Carson and I are friendly, you know, maybe we're in the same brokerage, maybe we're not, but we've known each other. We've bumped into each other at board events, right? And especially for, you know, the Brigham Tremont board, it's a smaller board. Everybody knows everybody. So I call up Carson and I say, dude, you're not going to believe it. They've decided to cancel the contract. I'm pissed, you know, I get it. I know you're frustrated. I'm frustrated as well. They don't have any good reason, dude. They're just simply being dorks. They're completely unreasonable. Their parents have, you know, are trying to talk them out of it. I've tried to convince them that there aren't any problems, but you know how this goes. Anyways, man, I'm really sorry, but we're having to cancel. Okay. What have I done? Sarah, you're muted.
Gave up too much information, broken their confidentiality.
Absolutely. Now, I've seen agents put this in writing in an email. They've called their client names in emails. And I'm like, if this goes to court and they pull up that email and they read it saying, did you send this to the listing agent? I said, we are screwed. You cannot do this stuff, right? So I'm going back to our form here. And when I say that there is no room for explanation, I mean, don't explain anything. You don't sympathize with the other and say, you know what, I'm really sorry. It's unfortunate. Well, why are they canceling? I can't disclose. Okay. Why can't you disclose? Because you have a confidentiality expectation in your fiduciary duty. Well, if you'll just tell us, I mean, we'll make it right. Well, it's because they ate some bad porridge last night and they got this really weird feeling in the evening and hallucinated all night long. And they're like, oh no, you know, the place is haunted. We don't feel good about it. Whatever it is, if I disclose those things, they see it as a bullcrap reason and they want to sue my clients. Like, that's not valid. But you know what the language in the contract says? It says in the buyer's sole discretion. Doesn't matter if they ate bad porridge. Doesn't matter if they were on shrooms or whatever it is and hallucinating. Okay. We don't disclose that information because we don't want to create a fight. We check the box, we send it over. When the other agent calls and says, why are they canceling? We say, you know what? I can't disclose it. I'm really sorry. And we haven't given them any ammunition to sue our clients. Are we all clear on this? Okay. What if it is canceling after the due diligence deadline, but prior to the finance and appraisal deadline? Somebody explain to me what happens now. I'll stop sharing. We've passed due diligence. Okay.
It needs to be done for financial reasons. So I've even had clients that came through and just decided that the loan no longer worked for what they wanted to do. And we canceled out for financial reasons. I don't know if the other agent could have fought that more than they did, but they accepted it as if it was a financial cancellation, luckily.
Okay. Yeah, and there's lots of reasons why it could be a finance condition. All right. So let's jump down to the purchase contract and look at this section. We've got 8.2a, 8.3bi. So I've got the purchase contract in here. So we're scrolling down to this due diligence condition. We've got the appraisal condition. So they're canceling let's see, after due diligence, but prior to finance and appraisal. Okay. So, sorry, let me go back to see exactly what those were. This was the buyer's notice of cancellation. Let's look exactly at what sections those were that it references here. Okay, 8.2a. Oh, that's the appraisal. 8.3bi. Okay, 8.3bi is financing was required. Buyer's right to cancel before the finance and appraisal deadline, again in buyer's sole discretion. They're not satisfied with the terms of the loan. Then they can cancel the purchase contract, whereupon blank amount of the buyer's earnest money shall be deposited or released to the seller. Now, I can put 0 in here, which means all of the earnest money comes back to my buyer, or I could try to make my offer a little bit stronger. Let's say I've got $1,000 earnest money. I could say, you know what, if we cancel after our due diligence deadline, but prior to finance, we're going to give up half of our earnest money no matter what. Okay, this makes our offer stronger, but I don't need to do this. And please read the section, because I see a lot of agents just say, oh, we got $1,000 earnest money, and I see earnest money right here, so this must be another place where we type in earnest money. No, that is not the case. Okay, this is saying that normally I could get all of my earnest money back on this section, but in this case, if I put in $1,000, I wouldn't get any of it back. So, the remainder of the earnest money deposit would be released to the buyer without further written authorization from the seller. All right, so we need to make sure that we understand that the finance condition means that we can cancel prior to the finance and appraisal deadline and get our earnest money back. And then the other one was the appraisal condition, 8.2, buyer's right to cancel, that we can cancel this, but we have to provide, in this case, a copy of the notice of appraised value. Okay. So if we're going to be using that section to cancel, then we have to provide a copy of the appraisal. So that's this section 2 right here. After the REPC or after the due diligence deadline, prior to finance and appraisal deadline, in you know, and it says right here that the notice of appraised value is attached. And if we're canceling under 8.3BI, then earnest money gets released back to the buyer in this case. But there are other ways that we can cancel. What if I'm doing this one? Okay. So by the way, you get to choose 1, 2, or 3. If it's 3, you've got lots of different options that come up. Let's say that we're canceling after the finance and appraisal deadline. Is this a default? We missed our finance and appraisal deadline. We're canceling. Is this a buyer default? You're muted.
It's a buyer default, right? They've missed their deadline is what you're asking. Sorry.
They missed their finance and appraisal deadline, and now they're canceling.
Oh, but they're canceling before their deadline.
They're canceling before settlement.
Oh, well, they need to cancel before the finance deadline. Is that correct?
To
If
get
they were pulling out for finance reasons.
to get their earnest money back, but
Okay.
you didn't do
Oh,
that.
but can they cancel before that? Yeah, if they want to let their earnest money go.
Finance and appraisal deadline has passed. Settlement deadline has not passed.
Okay.
So they've missed finance and appraisal deadline. They cannot perform. They're canceling the contract. Is it?
No, they're allowed to do that, aren't
Okay.
they?
Yeah, it's not a breach. And this is very important that we understand this language. Okay. Because, sorry, if we go back down to the purchase contract and we go all the way down to the end to default, let's see, where was that? Right here, default. Default is when they fail to close on the home. That's the settlement deadline, right? And if that happens, there's 3 different remedies available. They can sue for actual damages. You know, they can take the earnest money as liquidated damages. They could sue to enforce the REPC, or they could return the earnest money and sue and pursue other remedies available at law, which a lot of times that just means actual damages, right? And those could mount up a lot higher than the $1,000 earnest money that we have at stake. And so it's very important to understand that if we're down here under 8.3BII, we do have a right to cancel after the finance and appraisal deadline, and it is not considered a default. So we've failed to obtain the loan, right? We're not obligated to purchase the property, which means they can't sue us for performance, which is one of those default remedies. What they can do is that they can take all of the earnest money deposit and accept that as the seller's, sorry, right here, the seller's exclusive remedy. The earnest money deposit is their liquidated damages. So whereas default, we have 3 potential remedies they could have. In this case, it's not a default. They've just canceled after finance and appraisal prior to settlement, and their only penalty is losing their earnest money. All right. So it is very important to understand the difference between what a default is and just failing to cancel. So that's this section right here. They've canceled after the finance and appraisal deadline. They lose their earnest money. All right. Risk of loss, section 20.2. Let's jump down there and look at this one. By the way, it is really important to check the correct box. Okay, so we need to not only understand what do all these different sections do, which is why we're taking the time to do this in a deep dive, but it's very important to check the correct box, because this can become a legal matter if we don't. So risk of loss, 20.2. If prior to closing, any of the property is damaged or destroyed by fire, vandalism, flood, earthquake, whatever, then either the seller or buyer may elect to cancel this, in which case the earnest money is returned to the buyer. So if, let's say that we go to move in and somebody's vandalized it, which by the way was a call I got just this week, just a couple of days ago. Somebody went to move into the home, somebody else had moved in, they had vandalized the property, and it was a wreck. Who pays for it? You know, like they had plugged up the toilets with towels and flushed the toilets and flooded the property. Just ridiculous stuff that somebody did just to be a jerk. So if prior to closing something like that happens, the risk of such loss or damage shall be borne by the seller. However, if the cost of repairing such a loss would exceed 10% of the purchase price, then either one can cancel it. So if I've got $1 million home and $100,000 damage is done, you know, or less than 100,000, then that damage should be borne by the seller. But if it's more than that, then buyer or seller can cancel. All right. So let's go back to our form. Now we know what that section is about. Subject to sell a buyer's property addendum. We should all know what this is. For the sake of time, I'm not going to jump to that addendum. Well, I actually put it in here. Let's go to it. It's a deep dive, right? So, subject to sell a buyer's property addendum. Buyer has a right to cancel before the due diligence deadline or after the finance and appraisal deadline, or they can cancel afterwards. So we have an option to cancel before or after. The difference is who gets the earnest money, right? So notice that with a subject to sell condition, that that the deadlines are the only thing that we have. We don't, there used to be an older form. Some of you that have been around for a while remember the older form that we had until X date to get the property under contract. We don't have that any longer. Apparently that was creating complications in courts or arguments or whatever. And so they've really simplified it down. And our only deadline is either our due diligence deadline or finance and appraisal. Why would we have both of those mentioned? Because if we have a cash buyer, there is no finance and appraisal deadline, right? We just got a due diligence deadline here with our subject to sell. So we would have a cash buyer saying, hey, if I sell my previous property, I can buy this one with cash. So it is still subject to sell, but now all I have is a due diligence deadline because I don't have a finance and appraisal deadline applicable. Because obviously if I'm doing cash, I'm not getting a loan or appraisal or anything like that. So if I haven't closed on my property, then I need to provide written notice no later than my due diligence deadline or the finance and appraisal deadline, whichever is later, whereupon the earnest money deposit is released to the buyer. If I cancel after that deadline, okay, then the earnest money deposit is released to the seller. And the seller agrees to accept that as their exclusive remedy. Now, remember, we're canceling prior to the settlement deadline. If you canceled after the settlement deadline, that's a default, and they have more remedies available besides that exclusive remedy of getting the earnest money. So if we jump back here to our buyer's notice of cancellation, we've now addressed the subject to sell. We've got our FHA VA loan addendum. Let's jump down to that one and look at how we can cancel based on that. All righty. Let's see here. Okay, so we're looking at section 3. Notwithstanding the finance and appraisal deadline, buyer shall not be obligated. This changes things, by the way. So we got a finance and appraisal deadline in there. Even if we missed that deadline, then we can't incur a penalty or forfeiture of earnest money if the home didn't appraise. Okay, if for a VA loan, the purchase price exceeds the reasonable value sort of by established by the appraisal. So if the home didn't appraise, they don't lose their earnest money if we've used this FHA VA addendum. Or for an FHO loan, the purchase price exceeds the appraised value, same thing. Buyer does have the right to complete the sale without regard. So the buyer holds the power here. They can complete the sale even if the appraisal didn't come in. But if the appraisal did not come in, then they can cancel and you can't keep the earnest money. So let's see. All right, I'm not seeing the cancellation part here. Anybody else see the cancellation part? Let's go back and make sure we're looking at the right one. FHA VA loan addendum. It's the right one. So that's the only thing that I can see is that they have the right to cancel here, even though they missed a deadline. If their appraisal didn't come in. Otherwise, I don't see any other sections remarking on cancellation. So if we're doing an FHA VA buyer, then we would want to use this FHA VA loan addendum cancellation rather than this one right here, right? So if it was 8.3 BII, canceling after the finance and appraisal deadline, if for some reason the appraisal didn't come in at value and it came in late, then we could use this cancellation right here and still get our earnest money back. So there's that one. Let's look at our secondary backup contract. So this is basically, we're in backup position. You know, whether we're, let's say that we're the buyer, we've made an offer on a home, they've got somebody else in primary position, at any time prior to the backup contract becoming the primary contract. So we could be sitting around for a month or two, right? There's somebody in primary position. Usually we're in a backup position because they had a subject to sell. And so the primary person gets notified, we've got a backup offer in backup position. We've got, they've got 3 days to remove their contingency. They could remove their contingency. We could still stay in backup position for that because maybe they still can't perform. But anytime prior to us being notified that we're the primary contract, because we're going to keep looking. We're looking at other homes. So we have the right to cancel at any time prior to becoming the primary contract. Once we become the primary contract, then all the rules of the purchase contract apply to us. But until we're the primary contract, then we have the option to cancel. And of course, any earnest money or anything like that. And actually, we're not actually going to be even delivering earnest money because we don't deliver that until we've got the receipt. Let's see. 7 calendar days after buyer's receipt of seller's notice. So the seller's notice would be that we're the primary contract. Okay. So, yeah, so seller's notice is defined right here. If the primary contract is canceled or withdrawn, seller shall within 4 days provide buyer with a written notice that the primary contract was terminated. That's the seller's notice. And within 7 days of that, then we've got to get earnest money turned in. So with this, we're not actually collecting earnest money. It just gives a legal right for the buyer to cancel. Okay, so there would be no earnest money collected in a backup position. So let's go back. We've addressed that one. Short sell addendum. Haven't seen a lot of short sells, but basically what the short sell addendum, this one's really simple. It just says, hey, this could be a really super long drawn out process. And so right here, okay, section 7, all of it basically says there's going to be significant time delays with this. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be long. It's going to be hard. It's going to be a pain in the butt. And during this process, during this significant time delay, circumstances may change for both the seller and the buyer. All right. So there could be a lot of other things. The buyer could find another home that better suits their needs, because this can take sometimes months to get this third-party approval. The seller could receive additional offers that are better for them. So basically, this contract means nothing, because if the seller got a higher offer, they could take it at any time. So prior to that third-party approval, we got a piece of paper. It's not super enforceable, because either buyer or seller can cancel, in which case earnest money gets returned to the buyer without further requirement. Okay, so short sells, they're a different animal. Hopefully we don't get into that market again. But yeah, that was a very frustrating section for a lot of people. So those sections right there, they address all of the different scenarios that could happen with a normal cancellation. Now you may be able to, maybe there's something that is completely different. You know, maybe it's you know, somebody died. The principal died in the transaction and they can't perform. So we might have an other scenario in here, but typically it's going to be one of these things. We're canceling prior to due diligence, after due diligence, but prior to settlement, or there's a bunch of different factors that could, depending on how they're selected, affect how earnest money is distributed. Let's look at the seller's notice of cancellation. Sellers don't have as many reasons to cancel. We've got the short sell addendum, which we just barely looked at. Okay, let's look at the REPSI at 8.3B under the finance condition. All right, 8.3B. Buyer's right to cancel. I don't see a seller's right to cancel in here. Anybody see that? Oh, here we go. Or seller may cancel. Okay, this is the only place right here. So if after the expiration of the finance and appraisal deadline, buyer doesn't get the loan, meaning the proceeds of the loan haven't been delivered as required under section 3.2. If we go back up and look at 3.2, that is addressing closing. So they didn't close on time. Then the buyer shall not be obligated to purchase the property, and buyer or seller may cancel the REPSI by providing written notice to the other party. Okay. If it's canceled under 8.3 BII, then the earnest money is released to the seller. So in this case, if we go to the seller's notice of cancellation, what this one is saying is that, hey, they failed to perform, and let's see, this was the financing condition. They failed to perform, but remember, failing to, like, the monies aren't there by settlement deadline. This is actually referencing closing. So this is very close to being a default. And we could say that this was a default, but if the seller's canceling because the buyer defaulted and we're just going after earnest money, that's a clean way to do it. If you actually go after default, then again, there's 3 different options there that you may want to or may need to specify. So a seller could cancel based on this one, which was failure to perform. All right, then we got our seller financing addendum. Section 8.1. Which is in a seller financing scenario, the buyer is providing their disclosures, basically their credit report, all of the different stuff that would have a seller reviewing to see that they wanted to be the lender for this person. And if the seller reviews that and says that, hey, you know what, we're not satisfied with this, we don't think that we want to do seller financing for this person, then the seller has the right to cancel this. Okay, so they just didn't approve those terms of the buyer's credit worthiness, basically. So there's the seller finance addendum. Then we've got risk of loss, which is those, vandalism, act of God, things like that we've already discussed. All right, and then the last cancellation form I want to look at is this contingent cancellation, and this is kind of a fun form. This is a very helpful one to understand and know that it's available, because it comes up all the time. We're approaching a deadline. It could be your due diligence deadline or your finance and appraisal deadline. And we do not have a resolution. Something came up. We've been going back and forth, or the seller's just not responding to us, whatever it is. And so I'm going to stop sharing this one because this is a good conversation right here. So this one is where, let's say that it's 3 p.m., 4 p.m. I get these calls all the time from agents saying, hey, we don't have an answer yet. Our deadline is 5 p.m. It's 4 p.m. right now. Our deadline is 5 p.m. We don't have an answer. We're trying to get, a bid from a contractor, or the seller's out of town. What do we do? This is the solution to that. Okay, because if we send, let's say that we agree verbally, 4 p.m. we agree verbally, and we're talking over the phone, and they say, okay, we'll do this, send it over to us. So we send it over to them, but what if they don't sign it? And later on they say, oh, we changed our mind. Okay, again, according to Utah contract law, we have to have it in writing. That verbal agreement doesn't count. So what we can do is we can say, you know what, we're too close to the deadline here. So we're going to extend our deadline. We just need another day, maybe we need 2 days. Maybe there's this soil report we need to get an engineer to go do, and we're going to need a couple of weeks. So we're going to extend our due diligence deadline out a couple of weeks. All right. Now, what this says here is basically it's as close as we get to a unilateral decision, because I can't just say, if you don't do this, then we cancel. But with this form, I kind of can. I can say, look, if you don't extend till next week, we need another week to really do our due diligence on this. If you don't extend this, let's see, notice of cancellation. If for any reason seller does not accept the terms of this addendum in its entirety, and by the applicable deadline below, this addendum shall act as buyer's written notice of cancellation pursuant to our due diligence deadline. Notice that we're canceling. This is the prior to due diligence, or our financing condition, which is the prior to our finance and appraisal deadline. Okay, so in this case, we're going to be talking about due diligence. And so we're going to check that box, and the deadline to accept this is the last mutually accepted due diligence deadline. So that's in 1 hour. If you don't accept this within 1 hour, this is a cancellation. So this is, and what if they don't get to it? The seller is out of town, they're unreachable. Well, what we've done here is we've protected our buyer's earnest money, okay, which is the paramount thing. We're really trying to protect our client. Our goal isn't to cancel. Our goal here is protection. We're approaching a fast deadline. We haven't gotten a solid response. This serves as a cancellation. What if at 6 p.m., the buyer all of a sudden calls, or the seller all of a sudden calls and says, whoa, hey, I would have agreed to this. Do we have a contract? of 5 p.m., what happened? Somebody unmute themselves and tell me.
It was canceled.
5 p.m. is canceled, so we don't have a contract at 6 p.m., do we? So how do
No,
we solve?
don't. Yeah.
How do we solve that problem?
Create a new contract.
Okay, we could create a new contract, or we can come over here and reinstatement of REPSI, right? So our contract passed. We successfully protected our buyer's earnest money. Within the next 2 or 3 days, we resolved our issues and we said, okay, acknowledgement of prior cancellation. We acknowledge that the REPSI was previously canceled according to that due diligence condition. Notwithstanding the prior cancellation referenced above, the buyer and seller wish to proceed forward with this transaction and reinstate the REPSI. Accordingly, upon the mutual acceptance of this addendum, buyer and seller agree that their respective rights and obligations under the REPSI, including all prior addendum counteroffers, are reinstated in their entirety and are in full force and effect. We further agree that the contract deadlines in section 24 are modified as below. Because obviously if this died, then all of our deadlines are going to be out of whack. So we can reinstate some deadlines here. But otherwise our contract is in full force and effect. We don't have to rewrite a whole contract. All we're doing is clarifying our deadlines and we're good. We can move forward. You have a chance to add some other terms there as well. Okay. So with that said, we have gone over all of the different ways of canceling the contract. We've dug in, we found all the little obscure references to where buyers or sellers can cancel. And now you know that if you're working with somebody that you want to fire, it's got to be a mutual agreement. And you have some protections built into that mutual agreement where you're not just getting shafted. Okay. And if you're working with a buyer or a seller and they need to cancel, you understand how important it is to find the right section to cancel under and the importance of confidentiality. Because none of those forms gave us the right to disclose anything more than that checkbox. And even though we may be friends, and Carson's a great guy, and I like Carson, and he says, well, tell me why. I can't. Okay. We have to keep it aside because Carson has a different fiduciary duty of full disclosure to his client. So anything that I tell him, if I say, you know what, my clients are a-holes and I completely disagree with them, I kind of wish your guy would sue him. I've seen agents put that kind of stuff in writing. If I say that to Carson, he's got an obligation of full disclosure to his clients. And he goes back and says, you know what, this other agent might join us in suing this guy. He's so ridiculous. And I have problems, right? I've violated my fiduciary duty. I did not look after my client. By the way, that expectation of confidentiality, what happens when our contract ends? What happens to that confidentiality? Yep, Janelle's right. She's motioning. It goes on. Okay. So it extends beyond the end of our agreement. Anything that's confidential there. So I don't talk to Carson next week at the office party and say, oh, by the way, here's the real reason. Okay, we need to keep those things confidential. All right, folks, that was our deep dive on cancellations. Was this a valuable one for you? Okay, hopefully it was. Hopefully we follow the rules. These are things that get agents in trouble all the time, trip us up. So I appreciate you joining me today. I'm going to stop the recording.